All right, let me regather the room if we can. I know there's lots of engaging conversations happening around the room and networking, but if you'll find your seat, we have a really good discussion coming up. It's my privilege to introduce you all to Lee Jones. Lee is the Executive Director of the Rural Partnership Network under USDA Rural Development. And also coming to the stage will be Christine Sorensen, who's the Rural Partnership Network Lead of Engagement. So Christine, you want to come up?
All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I heard a good bit of chatter, and I'm glad you're all able to take your seats and we get a captive audience here. But again, I'm Lee Jones. I serve as Executive Director for the Rural Partners Network at USDA Rural Development. Very excited to be with you guys today. Very excited to have the team as well in Washington, D.C. I'm a child of the South, born and raised in Louisiana, still live there. I appreciate being in a room with individuals where I can say y'all and it will resonate. It doesn't matter where you're from. If you're like, as we say, country cousins, we can say y'all and everybody know what we're talking about. Christine's gonna try to say y'all, but I'm not. I don't know if I have high hopes yet. Ain't gonna work. We're gonna give it a shot. That's gonna be one of your metrics for the day. But at any rate, I spent the majority of my career, well, all of my career has been with rural development, the majority of which was spent at the state level in Louisiana. And what I can tell you is that a lot of the work that we're going to talk about today in terms of the Rural Partners Network really resonates because of the type of activities that we performed in Louisiana. And just a few minutes ago, I got so excited because I saw some of my former colleagues in Louisiana, an entity that we used to fund, and got a chance to see Miss Juanita Woods. And I mean, seeing her in the back of the room, already had high spirits listening to the energy in the room, but then, just to see her and think about some of the engagements that we've had over the years has been supremely impactful. I'm delighted that we're able to have our team here. Christine, one of my partners in crime, has always been someone that I've worked really well with, and looking forward to future growth as well. I would like to quickly acknowledge some of our other team members here. We have Michelle Moore, who serves as our lead for operations. Michelle, raise your hand back there. We have Jill Reeves, who's been serving, taking a lead on our communications products. Hey, Jill. Angela Richardson. Angela's been serving us really extremely well in community engagement activities. And Christina Rivera. Christina. Oh, hey, Christina. You'll see Christina roaming around and probably taking a few pictures here and there. She handles a lot of our social media, among other things. I'd also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that many of our wonderful USDA Rural Development State Directors are here. So hopefully you guys would have an opportunity to engage them very succinctly throughout the day. Would you guys? I would appreciate if some of our state directors would just stand really quick, wave your hand, so they know who you are. All right. Thank you all. So as you know, we come to you guys from rural development, and I'll just quickly say rural development, is one of those wonderful agencies in the federal government. We are the only agency that has a specific charge to impact rural communities. And we often say that I won't get into like the numerous programs that we offer because there's over 50 of them. But if you think about a raw piece of land, rural development can build a town from under the ground up when you think about water systems and all those kind of things. So wonderful agency that does a number of things. And I hope that each of you in this room that have a focus on rural have had an opportunity to engage rural development. If you have not, we need to fix that. But in Rural Partners Network, it started as a campaign promise of then candidate Biden to make sure that we reaffirm a federal commitment to rural communities. And a lot of what we do is based on that all-of-government approach. Historically, rural development has engaged in a number of place-based type strategies, and many of those strategies involved liaising with federal partners. So we have what we might sometimes call our usual suspects based on whatever issue we're facing. If we're talking about business development, obviously we have a relationship with Small Business Administration. If we're talking about infrastructure needs, we often have a relationship with Environmental Protection Agency and others. But under the auspices of the Rural Partners Network, we're excited about this all-of-government approach to reaffirming that commitment to rural communities in such a way that we're being more intentional about the way we invest in rural communities. The list CEO mentioned a bit ago that 20% of the population in the United States lives in rural communities, but we know that there's nowhere close to 20% of federal dollars that get invested in rural communities. Now, I'm not suggesting that that we ensure that that 20% of federal resources go to rural communities, but I am advocating for a larger share of that. So we have to take the activities and do the work that needs to be done to make sure that we're spurring additional investment into these communities, especially those that need us the most. We're going to get a little bit more into like how we arrive at where we are in terms of identifying community networks. I just want to get some of the terminology that you're going to hear us use today out of the way, but we'll get more into that in just a moment. But first, I just want to talk about what kind of the impetus was behind getting us to where we are in Rural Partners Network. So USDA rural development is obviously no stranger to place-based initiatives. We've done many in the past, such as Promise Zones. We've been involved in local foods, local places, Stronger Economies Together, which is another initiative under rural development. Then Strike Force was under the Obama administration. Each of the individuals that I asked to raise their hands, our colleagues, previously worked at the state level and had an opportunity to be involved in the implementation of the Strike Force initiative. Strike Force at the time was designed to target persistently impoverished counties across the country and make sure that we're deploying USDA specific resources. So we look at Rural Partners Network, that served as the impetus for it, but we look at it as like Strike Force on steroids. In other words, we look at the opportunity to have all of our federal partners at the table doing some of those very same activities. And I'm going to ask Christine in just a moment to talk a bit more about some of the data that we look at and how we arrived at selecting these community networks. But what we're looking to do is work with rural communities, and we want to be able to identify infrastructure challenges, job creation, community-based projects, things like that. But it always starts with listening first. There's too many times where, and I'm going to speak specifically about rural development. There's too many times where we've gone in and we've been very prescriptive about the work that we want to do. And it often starts with being more direct or being more assertive about what we do in the community, but we don't always listen to what that community needs first. So it always starts with that from the very beginning, even at the initial engagements before we've selected community networks, we always start with the listening first. So, it's meeting them where they are, not where we think they should be. And, while we can research and we can gain insight into a community, it's really about hearing and learning from that community and, having the emotional intelligence to respect those cultural sensitivities. Rural communities are not a monolith. Justin often says, if you've been to one rural community, you've been to exactly one rural community. So we approach it from that perspective that we need to be intentional about understanding what the needs are of a specific community or community network in this context. So why do we need RPN? First, we know that despite making up 20% of the population, we do not have 20% of federal investments going into rural. We need to fix that. Second, in rural development, we know that there are inequities out there. And surely if rural development can identify inequities in federal investments, our federal partners are doing the same thing. So in many cases, the vast majority of the communities that we have targeted thus far are seeing similar inequities among other rural communities. Other federal agencies. I'll give you an example of that. And this is specific to rural development, where I often say we unintentionally create additional inequities. One of our most popular programs is called the Community Facilities Grant Program. There's a loan component to that program as well, but through the Community Facilities Program, many resource deficient rural communities are able to use that program to do things like police cars, fire trucks, turnout gear, things like that many communities would not otherwise be able to do. But it requires a match, and that match is based on median household income and other factors. But when you get into talking about matches, if it's a rural community that has a annual budget of $200,000 where salaries and expenses and bills and all that have to be paid out of that, where are they going to find the money to match? So that's those inequities that we create. And if our charge as rural development is to expend our allocation, which is end of the day, that's kind of what it comes down to. If that's our charge, then what are we going to do? We're going to go to those communities that we know have the wherewithal to navigate that application process and likely have the ability to meet that match. All that's doing is widening the gap. So how do we fix that? How do we address those barriers that we unintentionally created? I believe all federal programs are designed with the best intention in mind, but sometimes they're created in such a way that it makes it difficult for many of our rural communities to access. So it's identifying those kind of barriers and acting on them. Third, we're all stakeholders in rural vitality. It's about addressing rural issues and those inequities that we talked about, but it's not just federal. It also goes into our non-governmental partners, philanthropic organizations. We've heard a lot about that today. there's an extreme need for technical assistance throughout rural communities. And I'm very excited that we're going to have an opportunity to engage rural LISC on some of that technical assistance around their pillars. And that's like, one of the most exciting aspects that we'll come back to in just a moment. It also requires ensuring that underrepresented communities have a voice at the table. We've heard a lot this morning about the term, that BIPOC terminology, communities of color, so on and so forth. But when we look at the communities that we serve, we always get a feel for the demographic profile. Christine is going to touch more on the data piece of it, and where it really resonates is that we know that there are underserved quadrants of communities that we need to ensure that we can build those collaborations and make sure those voices are heard as well. So at this point, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the federal partners that have just referenced, and then we'll get into how we implement our Rural Partners Network. So we often say that there's 20 plus federal agencies that are involved, including USDA Rural Development. We lead it in collaboration with our partners at the White House Domestic Policy Council. Hello, Kellyanne. So in collaboration with Domestic Policy Council, we're able to engage numerous federal agencies. That includes who I mentioned as usual suspects, Environmental Protection Agency, Small Business Administration, and many others, but it also goes beyond that. It gets into Health and Human Services. It gets into the regional commissions, Delta Regional Authority, Appalachian Regional Commission, the newly formed Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, even the Denali Commission for Alaska is involved as well. And what we're very excited about is that each of those agencies, in the spirit of that federal-wide collaboration, have identified what we call a rural desk officer. That rural desk officer kind of serves as the front door, so to speak, to that federal agency. So as we identify opportunities or barriers, in this case for rural communities, we are able to, our team is kind of able to play a matchmaker role. And in such that as we understand better the opportunity and understand the programs that may address that, we can bring that to this table of rural desk officers and get a feel for like how we can address that particular issue. So that's been extremely exciting. But now we want to talk a bit more about like where RPN is. And so we've been very intentional about how we rolled it out. I'm going to call out the specific states that we have, and then I'm going to ask my colleague Christine to talk a little bit more about our strategies in terms of how we engage communities, the data that are used to identify what those communities are, and even more. So we rolled out in cohorts. Cohort 1 were the states of Arizona, where we specifically focused on tribal communities, Kentucky, New Mexico, Georgia, and Mississippi. So in each of those states in cohort 1, which we launched in April of this year, each of those states we were able to identify somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 community networks per state. Then in cohort 2, which we just recently launched in November, those are the states of Alaska, the island of Puerto Rico, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Nevada, and North Carolina. So we've gone through the process and identified community networks in each of those states as well, but one of the tenets of Rural Partners Network is our ability to be flexible. So what that meant was, as we started out talking about 2 to 3 community networks per state, we realized that maybe we shouldn't cap ourselves at any certain number. So we have a bit more than 3 in a couple of these states, and very excited about the possibilities there. And there is a staffing component that we'll touch on. But first, Christine, would you talk a bit more about the data component and how we went about engaging these communities in such a way to identify those networks?
Completely, Lee. Thank you so much. And a big shout out to Lori Finnison and Marcia Erickson. They're very early career mentors of mine. So thank you so much. Shout out from South Dakota. The call to action really for Rural Partners Network was, how can the federal government do a better job? And so we took that to heart as well in our community selection process. It was very intentional. And why it may have started out very data driven, right? And more of that quantitative analysis to be done of where are those underserved areas? Where is the need? Is that we do pivot and move through the process of very qualitative. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But how we started for those cohort 1 and cohort 2 states is that as we were provided the list of the states to focus in, it really was where is that persistent poverty? Where are some social vulnerabilities or distressed communities, right? So those indices really kind of gave us more of that holistic data approach to where should we focus first. But it really didn't stop there. And that's the important part for Rural Partners Network, is that we also looked at more of the qualitative, gave us those areas of need, but where's the areas of opportunity? And where is some really good stuff happening? And that was really through the process, as I said, community selection process. Hey, this is the data, this is the areas to focus. but where there's leadership development, where are some really good projects just waiting to be moved further? Where are there some strong organizations like those that are in this room that can actually be those champions for these communities, that can either be the hosts for some of this work and who can carry forward and partner through this network, but also through the two strategies that Lee just covered. And I'm going to put a pin in those two. The first one is that federal interagency support through the rural desk officers. All of these federal agencies in a room talking about how they can do a better job for rural communities and address policy changes or barriers. But that second pin is the hiring of human capital, of actually permanent staff that'll be put in place to support the community networks. So that's why this process is so important, because we are picking areas of focus, both need and opportunity, that's going to receive a person to help them do things, right? Move the needle, move projects forward. And that's what we heard. We addressed, we discussed with the community networks, what do you need? And a lot of times that first answer is, give me a loan and grant, please. You know, like, we just need the money. But then they'd sit back and they'd say, truthfully, I just need someone to help me navigate, provide the capacity and the technical assistance to move the needle and move those projects forward. So that's why we're intentional about what the support looks like. And that is in the form of human capital. And so our community networks that were selected is really intentionally where this support's going to go. So as we picked within those areas, Lee talked about community networks. We go through the community selection process. We say, hey, these are some areas we want to focus. What's going on good? We have these conversations with our federal partners, our regional, state, and local partners. We meet with the communities then, and we say, hey, this is what Rural Partners Network is. Are you interested? And truthfully, the whole second tenet to Rural Partners Network is that it's community driven. So at this point, we as federal employees don't say to you who you are. We say to these rural communities, who are you? And they give us their regional footprint. So that's in definition what a community network is. It's these areas of community need that say to us, we really encompass 3 counties because we work really well together. Or sometimes they also mirror an Economic Development Administration regional footprint, right? Our partners. Or they may be just one really strong county and city who want to move some projects forward. So first commercial break is going to be go to rural.gov. Lee will cover that at the end, but rural.gov will kind of give you an idea of who these community networks are in the states. So we meet with the communities, they tell us who they are, they give us a letter of interest, and then we select from there. And then we hire the staff and we support them with the regional and the state-based partners, as well as the federal interagency partners. So it's a process that we're really trying to pilot as being intentional and very community driven. And it's an important part of the work. So first, a thank you to all the partners in the room that have made that happen as well. Lee?
Thank you, Christine. And one thing that I want to mention in terms of like that community engagement is that we intentionally set the bar relatively low to access Rural Partners Network, and that was intentional. We recognize that federal application processes can be quite cumbersome. And understanding that, the idea was, okay, we want to make sure that we don't create an application package that's going to take this community weeks or months to complete in some context. It's not going to require them to go hire somebody to write this for them or anything along those lines. So in doing so, like one story that resonated, I was in North Carolina and when we were rolling out cohort 2 the week of September 12th, so probably around September 13th, 14th, in a community talking about Rural Partners Network, inviting them to join us in Rural Partners Network by specifically stating their interest. And I said, okay, and it's September 14th, we need these by September 26th. And the looks on the faces in that room was like, you want us to fill out a federal application in 12 days? Don't worry, my friend. Like, we're going to give you a template. First of all we need you to do is identify your footprint. And the only real requirement we had was that your footprint is contiguous. If it's multiple counties, make sure that it's contiguous in nature. Make sure that it makes sense, by looking at a map at a minimum. So in doing so, that really brought a lot of relief to these communities, and that, thank you so much. You created a process that allows us to access the federal government. It doesn't guarantee money for us, but it does guarantee that we get that attention that we so desperately need in this context. Which brings me to another point I'd like to make. When you think about rural communities, rural communities generally know who they are. They know what the conditions of their community are. They know that their community may, in general, be relatively poor, but it doesn't mean that as a provider of service that we go and say, "Oh, you poor thing." We don't do that. You go in and you understand what it is that that community wants to accomplish, and you provide them the level of assistance that's necessary to help them accomplish those goals. That could be in the form of partnering with other organizations, such as organizations in this room, to provide that technical and capacity building assistance that they need. But at the same time, we do want to ensure that the work that we do resonates and that it lives. In other words, the old adage, you give a man a fish, he'll eat for days. You teach a man a fish, he'll eat for life. We want to make sure that we're raising the bar in these communities and helping, raise it in such a way that as we proceed and grow into other areas with Rural Partners Network, that these communities that we had initially identified are able to continue to pursue these opportunities and make a difference in their communities. So along those lines, I do want to talk a little bit more about the staffing piece, because as I mentioned, Strikeforce, among other place-based efforts, really set the stage for what Rural Partners Network is now. But what I can tell you about some of those previous place-based efforts, they did not come with staff. People like, my colleague Christine, and people like, our colleagues in the back of the room, as related to Strikeforce, were responsible for deploying that as a collateral duty. I'm sure many of you are used to wearing multiple hats. So are we at Rural Development. So please don't take this as a complaint. It's a celebration. We're proud of the work that we did through Strikeforce, but we're celebrating the fact that we're able to have this permanent staff in place to provide that additional assistance to these rural communities. Some of that assistance may look like, helping to plan and prioritize around particular strategies. It could be helping to identify those barriers and bringing them back to leadership that has the capacity to address those barriers. And it could be just advocating and making sure that they get that additional attention. A lot of federal programs are out there. I mentioned that Rural Development has 50 plus. I think the number is over 500 federal programs or something along those lines. So far be it for any one person or any one community even know what's available to them. So when you go into a traditionally resource deficient community, a lot of their dependencies are on like the CDBG. Well, I can't match that until I get approved for the CDBG, or I get this earmark from my state legislature. And that stuff is not easy to access. And if you're waiting on that, then you're likely falling further behind, even more. So the idea here is that we're able to have staff in place that can help navigate a lot of those opportunities that make the most sense for that community, and also connecting to the technical assistance that's going to be necessary. So we're very excited about the energy that's around Rural Partners Network from the perspective of like some of our non-governmental partners, Rural LISC included. Rural LISC has been absolutely impactful, and we know that that's going to grow even more as we proceed. So we're excited about the opportunity to engage Rural LISC in such a way that they're going to provide some direct support to our, specifically our cohort 1 states, but we'll think about how we do more in cohort 2. And a lot of what they're going to do is going to be built around the pillars that Rural LISC is able to identify. So those pillars really align with a lot of what we've learned from these community networks that we've identified. So part of the process, once we've identified the community network, we ask them to provide us with what we call just an initial needs assessment. We haven't gone in and done any planning and prioritization. Just give us a list of the things that your community wants to, or at least thinks they want to pursue. This is, again, this is pre-conversational, pre-prioritization, but they can give us a list. So now we better understand that there are a lot of common needs out there. We understand that there are significant housing needs, and we also further understand that that housing need takes on many faces. It could be affordable housing. It could be what we call workforce housing, that has so many different connotations and definitions, but it's really about like mixed use and different types of housing. And it's really about developing a housing strategy. So we're excited about the work that Rural LISC is going to do with us to help us identify some of those housing strategies that'll be most impactful. One such example, and I love bringing this one up because it's representative of a community that's part of Rural Partners Network that may be closer to the higher end of the spectrum, if you will, in terms of capacity. That's Grenada, Mississippi. Grenada is part of the Grenada Lake District Partnership that also includes Yalobusha County in Mississippi. And Grenada has some very exciting things going on in that community. They have an industrial site that is growing by leaps and bounds. Milwaukee Tools. I don't know how many of you are tool folks, but I like tools. That's one of the Christmas gifts that I often get. So knowing that Milwaukee Tools is going to have a significant presence in this community, something to the tune of about 1,000 jobs, and if you add in the construction jobs that are going along with it, you're probably talking about a neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 jobs overall. But with that in mind, as of May of this year, Grenada had exactly 0 homes on the market. They had a significant challenge with rental housing. So you think about these things and you recognize the footprint that Grenada occupies and the opportunity that they have from a housing perspective. They're really behind the 8 ball. Milwaukee Tools, that site figures to be fully completed and functional by late 2023, 24 in that time frame. What can we do between now and then to make sure that we're addressing their significant housing needs? Because we know that a company of that magnitude is going to serve a much broader footprint, but it's also going to really be spur some livable wage opportunities for people that live within that footprint as well. So it's working with the local community to look at adjudicated properties and things like that can be put back into the tax rolls. It's identifying a strategy. How do you incentivize housing growth in this area? Furthermore, there are other opportunities that we've realized as well, such as infrastructure needs, which is very significant. We know that there's significant broadband needs out there. I think one of the best things that the federal government did recently was look at broadband speeds, because for a bit, a lot of the broadband programs that were out there through rural development, through NTIA and other providers, really focused on a level of speed that did not necessarily fit a lot of rural communities. Many of them, despite being underserved, had 25/3. Well, now we're talking about 100 up, 100 down. That's huge for a rural community. That allows you to not have to go to a local Wi-Fi access point to do homework and things like that. So better understanding the needs of these communities and addressing them in such a way that we can be more intentional about those investments, and then just getting that attention. We've talked to so many communities, like when we launch, and the Secretary of Agriculture is in Greenwood, Mississippi, making this huge announcement of this wonderful opportunity. And you hear people in the community say, we've never had anyone of this magnitude visit us. So this is huge. Secretary Vilsack and Ambassador Susan Rice for Domestic Policy Council in small Cadott, Wisconsin, in a meat market of all places, and
buying
how
beef sticks.
Buying
right?
beef sticks, right? Locally produced. That was hugely impactful to that store. And that local community in general. So some of the ways that our federal partners are looking to support is like that intentional access to them and making sure that there's some visibility, but also by looking at the way we deploy our programs. And what I mean by that is we're not necessarily always talking about priority points. We're not always talking about set-asides. While that may be important, it is also important to think about that we're going to specifically call out Rural Partners Network in these announcements. What does that do? Now, many of you, there could be some in this room, but many of you know of organizations and entities that are really, really strong at navigating federal programs. So when they're reading a new announcement, it could be the Thriving Communities Opportunity through Department of Transportation or HUD, and they see that it specifically says Rural Partners Network, they want to know, what is this? What is it, and how do we get involved in it? How do we focus on it? And one such example came about recently with University of Maine. Would you mind touching a bit more on that from the seafood perspective? Wasn't that exciting?
Just a great connection, because they saw that Alaska was part of our cohort two state, right? That we were going to be focusing. And for Alaska specific, that's the one thing that we do pivot, is it was kind of a hybrid. What are those communities of need and the areas that need us the most or can collaborate with us? And some of the times that's those coastal Alaska Native villages, right? And of course, we know that a major economic driver is going to be fishing. So University of Maine reached out to us and say, how can we connect with you? We see that you're focusing in Alaska. How can we put together somewhat of a regional innovation of that fisheries and the economic driver that you're seeing in Alaska, and how can we coordinate? And so those are the connections that are made. And as we point out, Rural Partners Network, and maybe we have a call to action. Yep. As you've heard about Rural Partners Network and possibly the states that we're focusing in, but also all the other states that are also part of that larger federal engagement and resources and tools that we're working on as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was extremely exciting and a unique, way to address a rural community. When you think about going from the far East Coast all the way to upper West Coast, and having that connection there, and so that was exciting to have that conversation. And we're seeing that more and more by specifically calling out Rural Partners Network and federal applications. We want to make sure that we leave a few times for a little bit of time for questions, but we do want to address a couple more things as it relates to staffing. Heard Hillary and others in the last session talk about some of the workforce challenges that they've had. I want to readily acknowledge that staffing has been a challenge for us as well. Now, we think we've shifted the paradigm there in terms of the way that we outreach these positions, but I do want to make you all aware. We do have an amplification package. Jill, raise your hand one more time, please.
Yeah. Help wanted.
Yeah, help wanted.
Yeah.
This is another challenge or a call to action that we have. If you, some of you in this room may already be within, the area to have received some of that amplification about the hiring opportunities in the states. But if you would be interested in potentially receiving that package, amplifying these opportunities, we would love to be able to share that with you, and ask that you share it throughout your networks, because what we've seen resonates is by amplifying even more, that we get access to much more qualified applicants. I remember a time, and I believe, personally, I took this for granted. I remember a time when, a federal job was it. That's what you get, that federal job, you got that stability, you want it, and you have to have it. But the federal government is finding out now that no, we've got to be a lot more visible if we want to make sure that we're attracting quality candidates. So that, along with many of the other things that we want to accomplish, we're measuring ourselves by those staffing resources, new collaboration. We want to make sure that we're increasing application activity, which will eventually lead to an increase in federal investments. We want to make sure that we're impacting job creation and retention and even more. And personally, when I was thinking back to our rural development state directors, I think one measure of success is as long as Ken Korn and Rhiannon back there are saying, when are you bringing RP into my state? That's a good sign that we're doing something right. You know what I mean? So we're getting those kind of calls all the time. So again, just very excited about the opportunities that we're realizing through Rural Partners Network. I realize that this is a brief session. We're going to be around all day, including at the reception this evening, and look forward to further engagement. I do want to state that, if there are particular questions that you have, we have an easy way to access us. It's Rural Partners Network at USDA.gov. Feel free to reach out to us. Several of us have access to that, and we always are responsive through there. Christine previously mentioned rural.gov. Now, obviously, every federal agency has their site, their websites, but rural.gov was designed to be like that all of government customer-focused website where we can really celebrate Rural Partners Network, but also provide resources to any rural community in need. So it's still kind of in its, I would say maybe in its toddler status now. I won't say it's in its infancy anymore, but we're continuing to build out rural.gov, and it's going to be a tremendous resource for rural communities. Of course, eventually linking back to our federal partners, but if you're a rural community and you're looking for assistance in small business development, rural.gov could be a resource that will tell you all the different resources that are out there for small business development. So we'll also feature, pages for our community networks. You'll also have an opportunity through rural.gov when you visit to subscribe. We have a bi-monthly newsletter that we're publishing now, and able to send that out as well, and hope that you guys will subscribe to that. In addition, generally in USDA, the agency at the agency level can have a Twitter account, but we're a little bit unique. Rural Partners Network was able to have its own Twitter. So if you are active on Twitter, we ask that you follow us as well. We follow back, retweet, and all those things. It is at RuralGov. Christina, who I mentioned, was taking pictures, that really does a great job with our social media content, and just looking forward to being able to do even more there. So with that, we do want to open the floor for any questions that may exist, and look forward to any new relationships and collaborations that we can form. All right.
I just want to compliment you because you had several online questions, but then you answered them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm from Georgia and excited about Rural Partners in Georgia. We just got a placemaking grant. We'll be working with one of your Rural Partners communities. I'm curious if you can tell us a little more about kind of what the day-to-day might look like for your rural partner employees that are kind of field-based, and how they're going to liaison with the communities, with other partners, with both in the state and the federal government. Just tell us a little more about kind of how y'all envision that working or how it's working, maybe your earliest hires. Just curious about that.
Sure, that's a great question, sir. And we'll probably kind of tag team this a bit, but and I'll speak specifically in the case of Georgia. That team has really come on board in the last couple of months. So are they at the level of engagement that we want them to have throughout those networks? Not necessarily. However, we don't wait. We don't wait on hiring staff to engage. So we've already had a great deal of engagement. Angela Richardson has done a great job of helping us, navigate the engagement process in Georgia. But to answer your specific question, what we, part of what we envision is that they're going to, target that network as a whole and think about, how to plan and prioritize around particular needs and strategies, while also looking at individual quadrants of that community. So that, I think their first focus is probably going to be on municipalities within the area, but they also have a charge to think about nonprofit organizations, make new collaborations, to think about small businesses that may need assistance. So the idea is that, while a community network is mostly consists of local government and economic development, that there are also organizations that, small businesses and more that require a specific level of assistance. So we need to make sure that there is an awareness around what it is that, that we're wanting to accomplish in Rural Partners Network, especially awareness around the various opportunities that are out there. And it's abundant. So many, I think about from the case of a small business, most small businesses have some sort of relationship with SBA. However, are they aware that rural development also offers a number of small business development opportunities? So we just want to make sure that we're moving the needle there. From a selfish perspective, we definitely want to make sure that we're impacting the rural development pipeline. However, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are engaging our partners in such a way that they're able to, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the federal family to be more intentional about the way we invest, and RPN is going to serve as the impetus and the focal point for that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Add anything to that?
Yeah, just to say that, community networks, they're hosted most times in one instance is Mayor Matt, right, for Twin City, and how he'll have some projects that he wants to move forward. He'll make that connection. He'll talk to his community liaison, and then that community liaison has the direct connection to possibly someone from Department of Transportation who's going to pick up the call at DC and get on a call with them and talk about some of that sidewalks that they want to update in their town. And that's the connection. That's what makes them excited about that. So working through that process, but really listening, as Lee started out with, right? Yeah.
I also want to add, the way we've had a one convening in Georgia thus far. We did it, had it in September, did it in Fitzgerald, Georgia, and the way we approach these convenings now is normally when the federal family comes in to do a convening, whether we're participating in a session like this or hosting something, we come up and we start, talking about our programs. Well, we want to flip that. So we flip our convenings in such a way that we hear from the community first. So the communities give a presentation about what their specific needs are, some of the things that they would like to celebrate, because obviously, if there are some particular successes, success can be leveraged. So give them an opportunity to present to us first. We should be the experts on the programs that we offer throughout our agency. So there's no reason why someone conducting outreach on behalf of the federal government should not be able to tailor that presentation based on what those specific needs are. So that's another charge that we have, is making sure that as our liaisons engage, again, you listen first and you tailor the approach to what those specific needs are. So we're not going to sit here and tell you about 50-something rural development programs. No, we're going to talk to you about the ones that that make the most sense for your particular community, and that's the case for for our federal partners as well. And we're doing that in other states.
You got a follow up? Awesome.
Thank you. Much appreciated. One of the things that came out of that was also recognizing those state-based partners. And with those state partners, one comment that was made from a state partner was that as long as they've been around, they had never come to that part of Georgia and specifically targeted it. So all of these community networks in Georgia are along the southern corridor. So they're southwest over to south central area of Georgia, and a state agency that's never gone there to intentionally target. So, being able to bridge that collaboration and create these opportunities, that's been incredibly impactful as well. Again, recognition that it's not just about federal investments, it goes beyond that. I think we may have an online question.
Yes, we have a few online questions. So the first question: many rural communities and counties are very small with limited staff and capacity. They have no capacity to pursue these types of opportunities, and it becomes the nonprofit that needs to drive these efforts. What thoughts are there to increase access by nonprofits to resources rather than limiting access application to only municipality?
Okay, great question. So, the question succinctly pointed out that, many times it's dependent on nonprofits or like the local planning and development district, council of governments, whatever the terminology is in the given state. But we also recognize that, from our perspective, it's through that philanthropic organizations that we're going to be able to be more impactful. So I've talked a bit about the cooperative engagement that we have with Rural LISC, but we're also pursuing another that involves establishing regionally specific technical assistance hubs. And what these technical assistance hubs are designed to do, again, this is a broader approach. Now, while one of the targets is Rural Partners Network communities, we recognize that there are many other rural communities that have needs as well. So leveraging philanthropic dollars to establish and CDFIs and others to establish these regionally specific technical assistance hubs that can help rural communities such as the ones that have been, the type that are identified in the question, navigate a lot of these processes and navigate those on behalf of a particular organization or municipality. Thank you.
We're getting so the one thing that I'd like to say is that if this resonated with you, if there's something that you think we're missing, catch us. We're going to be at that back table. We want to hear from you because hopefully, as you've seen, this is a very intentional, community-driven network building project and work and programs. So we really want it to be responsive to what all you feel needs to be implemented.
Yeah, that's the tenet of being flexible and the flexibility that we enjoy. But I do just want to say thank you all for indulging us today. Thank you, Rural LISC, for the invitation. I thought, a wonderful session thus far and looking forward to even more and invite further follow-up and feedback. We take criticism well and we respond to such. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. Give them a round of applause. All right. All right, so we're going to transition to talk more about how the federal government is assisting rural communities. So if I could, I'm going to ask Dr. Corey Wiggins, federal co-chairman of the Delta Regional Authority, to come to the stage. And then also joining him will be Amela Halovic. I am so sorry if I mispronounced your last name. Southerners are terrible with these things. Who is Director of Business and Workforce Investment at Appalachia Regional Commission. Give them a round of applause. Anytime Corey and I are on a stage together, we're bound to cut up. So this should be a good conversation. I am going to go get mic'd up, but while we wait, how about we start with introductions? Corey, why don't you give us a 5-minute overview of Delta Regional Authority?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Corey Wiggins. I serve as a fellow co-chair of Delta Regional Authority. We are a federal state collaboration where we focus on regional economic development across 8 states. Our states includes parts of Alabama, parts of Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Southern Illinois, and Southeast Missouri. And yes, that is a lot of ground to cover. We have 252 counties and parishes under our authority. We are a grant-making agency that focuses on basic public infrastructure in terms of water and sewer transportation projects. We invest in workforce development and training across the region. We do some health programming. We also invest in people through a leadership institute that we operate across our region. Ultimately, our work and what we do is really focus on how do we create jobs in the region? How do we retain jobs in the region, invest in people, and really help and support the Delta in creating thriving communities all across our region.
All right. I think that's a decent overview. You only do a couple of things right here. So
that's all.
Right.
That's all.
Many hats. Oh, you want to tell us about Appalachia Regional Commission?
Sure, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Amela Halovic, and I am a director of our Business and Workforce Investment team at ARC, the Appalachia Regional Commission. Primarily, our work falls into 3 different buckets. We are a grant funding agency. So we provide grants to communities who implement programs and projects. And secondly, we provide a lot of technical assistance. And thirdly, a bucket that might relate to grant making or not, we're always engaged in being a broker in in engaging different stakeholders and activities that might fall outside grant making. So those are our three buckets. I also have a visual if we want to
hit it.
I'm a big proponent of visual presentations. Especially for all of you in the room, if you're unfamiliar with our work, I just want to give you a brief introduction to what we do at ARC. Is it here?
It's the little red button, and I'm told it's
Green.
the green button.
Perfect. Green.
I wish I wasn't such a liar. We're good.
We're not gonna hold it against you.
So ARC, we're an economic development agency. We were created back in 1965 to bolster local and regional economies across the Appalachian region, to really leverage the assets that we have across the region to help achieve socioeconomic parity with the rest of the nation. So what we do, as I mentioned previously, we innovate, we partner, and we also actually, as a funder, of course, invest in different programs and projects, all related to economic development. We're a little unique and different. We have 14 members. The 14 members include 13 ARC states who are represented by a governor from each of those states. And the 14th member is our federal co-chair, who's appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The unique nature of our relationship is that when we do decide and when we are in the decision-making processes on our program strategies, policy, allocation of funding, we look at those types of activities through a state and federal partnership. So we look at it from those two particular perspectives. In addition to that component of the structure, we have the ARC DC Commission staff who are led by our executive director. And also separate from that office, we have the Office of Inspector General, which is very common across the federal agencies in the federal landscape. So when I say the Appalachian Regional Commission, what we mean by that, that's a geopolitical type of region created by an act of Congress back in 1965 and through the ARDA Act, the Appalachian Regional Development Act. It's comprised of 423 counties. We have 13 states, of course, and 74 local development districts, LDDs, or to some of you in the room, these might be called Council of Governments. I have here a visual of the progress that we have made so far, but there's still work to be done. So this is where ARC comes in. Through a strategic planning process that we engage in every 5 years, our 5 investment goals that you see here are reevaluated. And we go through a process, and actually we just recently went through one a year ago, so where we really solicited input from our communities to help inform our strategic plan and our economic development activities across the region. So our first activity or investment goal is creating economic opportunities. And this is really is to engage and provide funding for small businesses. It is to provide training and tools for entrepreneurs and startups. Our second goal is developing a ready workforce, providing funding for training programs, which engage middle school students all the way up to post-secondary students, teachers, and also entities who engage with businesses to develop customized training. Our third goal is critical infrastructure. This relates more to providing funding to water and sewer systems for communities to actually implement those in their communities to upgrade their systems. And of course, broadband is a big issue for rural communities, so deployment of broadband as well. The fourth one, cultivating a natural and cultural assets. This is just relates to developing a tourism industry across the region. Of course, we have a lot of assets across the Appalachian region in the natural and cultural sector, so we want to leverage those assets. And lastly, a fourth one is fostering leadership and community capacity. And we do this by providing funding to organizations to provide training to economic developers, or it might be providing tools and resources for educators as well. We have many different roles. So aside from being a funder, we're also an advocate and an educator. So as we are situated here in the DC area and across the Appalachian region, we serve to educate other stakeholders who might not be familiar with the Appalachian or rural perspective to give them that lens through economic development, to educate them about the challenges of our region and also the best practices that we're seeing being implemented across our communities. I'm not going to mention all of these. We don't have time for that. We are also a coach. We provide a lot of technical assistance. Our staff work really closely with the communities that we serve, and the communities look to our staff for technical assistance, for resources, and other types of funding, either state or other federal funding as well. So how do we know how to direct our funding and our efforts? On a yearly basis, we develop a tool. It's our designation of economic status of counties. So on a yearly basis, this tool is developed, and this helps actually to drive our economic development activity. As you can see here, of course, in the most red parts, this is the most distressed areas, economically distressed areas. So as we get more to the bluer parts, this is more of areas that are doing a little bit better than the red ones. So each year we are evaluating the economic health of those particular counties. And this particular map is based off of a formula using per capita income, unemployment rates, and poverty levels as well. Just to name a few programs, our area development program is our formula-based program since 1965. It has been in existence. Our local development districts, we have a specific program from them. Because they are, our LDDs are the drivers more on the local level of actually helping entities to provide them with technical assistance, either in developing applications to apply for federal funding or actually taking on the role of administrating federally funded projects, because sometimes an entity might not have the capacity to administer that project. Access to capital is a big one for us. We provide revolving loans to businesses who might not be able to actually get those loans from more conventional type of entities. J1 visa waiver program. This is a one that's critical across the nation, especially in more remote areas where you have residents who might not have access to a hospital and they're just relying on a community clinic. So community clinics and those practices are looking for medical professionals and experts. Local access roads, of course, infrastructure is a critical component of economic development. And we provide funding for communities to create those connections between industrial sites, businesses, residential sites, access to interstates and highways. And speaking of highways and interstates, since the ARC's inception, we have the Appalachian Development Highway System. This is one of our critical missions as well. Of course, as you can see here, some of the breaks in the highway systems, there's still progress to be made. And someone mentioned previously, there was a question around community capacity or capacity building. When COVID started, our communities saw a lot of influx of funding. But a question was from nonprofits, local governments and other types of entities, how do we deploy the funding? And do we have the necessary resources to actually administer the funding? So through listening sessions and conversations with communities, we were able to develop a pilot program, which turned into the Ready Appalachia program. So these are targeted efforts in providing not only training, but funding for specific sectors or drivers of economic development in Appalachia. So nonprofits, LDDs, foundations, and local governments. I'm just going to mention a few capacity building initiatives. This is our Academies and Institutes program. And under that program, we have targeted efforts to provide training education for teachers and students in the STEM fields, entrepreneurship for youth. We have our Appalachian Teaching Project, where we engage universities and HBCUs in working with their professors and teachers on community-based economic development projects. And lastly, our Appalachian Leadership Institute. And this is an institute where we engage professionals in the economic development sector across the region, where they get to work in cohorts and attain additional training in leadership development. And this is just to name a few of our programs: Power, Inspire, Arise, and Work. These are a more competitive program. The first one targets more coal-impacted communities. The second one, Inspire, is targeting SUD-related efforts across the region, so engaging workers to maintain or retain employment. Arise is our brand new initiative funded through our infrastructure funding. It's an $80 million initiative. And then lastly, we have our work initiative, and this is led by Department of Labor and in collaboration with DRA and the Northern Border Commission.
Well, we're actually fortunate to have a couple of your grantees in the room
We are
today.
Okay.
Where's Pam? With Fahi. She told me to tell you to add a zero.
Add a zero
end
to
of
the
it,
grant.
But
Okay,
she said other than that, very appreciative.
great. So I'm glad there's some representatives from ARC. And then lastly, just looking ahead, as with many other different agencies, we have received record allocation and funding, which means that we're up to the task of developing new programs, more programs that help our communities. Those are more opportunities for them, more opportunities for us, and that just helps to accelerate economic growth across the region. So I'll stop there.
No, great
Yeah.
overview. So looking at the territories that both of you cover, of course, you're urban and rural, but they're both distinctly rural. What are you doing, Corey, to maybe catalyze not only impact, but investments within the workforce and small business systems of the Delta?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing, I think the place I'll start is so often when we get into doing our program design work, trying to figure out where we're gonna, set up grant making programs, is that we'll get inside our office or get inside our room and think about all the cool things we want to do and create an RFP and put it out. And we're taking a different approach. Our approach to it is actually, we actually go talk to people. We go engage. Most recently, the past several months, we've been crisscrossing across our region, going into small communities, going into places where, like, I grew up in Mississippi, having conversations with leaders, having conversations with people on the ground to help inform not only our decision-making about where we put our funds, but our decision-making about how we design our grant-making programs to make sure they actually are meeting people in communities where they are so they can be leveraged for impact. I think ultimately we always just throw around impact, we throw around the words equity, we throw around all these terms, but what does that really mean? And we create these definitions of what it means inside our offices that don't really work for people. It don't really work for communities. So I think one part of this is, and I always talk about how we have to meet people where they are and engage and have conversations. So even about how we're thinking about workforce, we're getting ready to release our notice of funding for workforce grants actually this month, mid-December. But one of the things that we've learned in talking to folks is that, and this is the only way that I can describe it, is that we're talking to communities about the availability of federal funds and how they can access these funds. But what's happening on the ground as we talk to mayors, talk to other local elected officials is almost if you were sitting down at your table to have dinner and you're hungry right now, but if somebody is telling you, well, I'm gonna have food ready for you tomorrow, or I got food ready for you next month, I'm hungry right now, right? And as a matter of fact, I've been hungry for a long time. So when you're on the ground talking to communities, yes, we have federal funds that are coming down, but we have so many of our leaders who have been trying to fill gaps around infrastructure for the past 20, 30 years. And so we first have to recognize that and think about how do we support them. So we've been thinking more about how do we leverage capacity building, strategic grant making, strategic planning dollars in a way to help folks kind of think about the future. Because it's hard to think about tomorrow when you're thinking about today. It's hard to think about the meal tomorrow when you're hungry today. And so part of our investments around workforce, yes, we have grant dollars. Yes, we want communities and places to leverage them, but we are very intentional about talking to people in the places that we serve, because ultimately that's what our mission is. That's what our work is.
Sure. Equity still has to be at the core of that. So oftentimes rural America gets stigmatized as being very white. But when we look across the landscape of America, whether it's frontier that includes tribal, whether it's the Southwest with Colonia, your district is distinctly Black. Mm-hmm. And they have disproportionately been marginalized and kept out of systems of workforce and small business. How are you creating inclusion within these systems with your investment practices?
Yeah, I think one of the things I benefit is one, both from, just some personal experience, Justin. So I grew up in Mississippi, a town called Hazelhurst. It's a town of 4,000 people. And I grew up 9 miles outside of the town. Right, so I grew up in the country. If you've seen TV or shows where they show like the person riding down the road and it's just a long road and just riding and riding, you're going to my house. And when it opens up into this place along the road, you have the house that my grandparents lived in. You have my house, my parents' house next door. You got my great aunt who lives across the street. You have my brother who now lives also across the street. And you got a family church that sits 50 yards from my parents' house that, land that we've lived on since 1935 when my great grandfather purchased it. So that's my rule. That's what I know. Those are the communities that make up our region. And so when we think about how do we build equity, equity is not a one-off thing. It is not a thing that we do. It is something that you build into the DNA of the operations. It is built into who you contract with and who are your vendors. It is built into your program design process. It is built into how you evaluate your impact, because defining impact, what it looks like in a 20,000 town or 50,000, 150,000 is very different when you're doing grant making to communities of 250 people who may say we need $500,000 and we may create 3 jobs or 10 jobs. Whereas on some grand scale of metric to some people, that may not make sense. But for folks who from rural communities, it makes all the sense in the world. And so we think about equity not as a one-off. We think about equity in the context of everything we do every day, because we cannot advance the region without it, right? And you can make the competitive, you can make the business case, you can make all these cases of why it makes sense. And at the very least, you can make the case that matters the most because it's just the right thing to do. So we breathe that into not only how we operate, but we're starting to see that engage in our program design. And the biggest thing I'll say this, is it's important to have feedback loops in organizations and grant making. And what that looks like is that you always got to put a mirror up against yourself, right? To determine what you're doing. Are you really meeting the mission? Are you really meeting people in places and communities? Just last week, we had the all staff meeting. We brought 2 folks in from Mississippi Delta. One was one of our planning development districts. The other was a alderwoman from a town of about 150 people. And they came in and talked to our staff about our work and who we are and what we're doing, to put a mirror up. Are we doing the things we need to do? Are we intentional? And one thing when you put a mirror up, sometimes some days you look nice and some days you don't look so nice, right? But you need to know it. So that's how we were thinking about equity, not in just in case of talking about it, but actually doing it and putting it into practice, policy, and in just how we operate.
Well, let's pivot over to Appalachia. So y'all are dealing with a little bit of a different mix than maybe the Delta, particularly dealing with this issue of transitioning economies. So we're seeing this pullback from coal, but there's a lot of workers left there who have skills. How are you making investments to ensure that those skills are transferable, but also that people can move into new gateway positions and incumbent worker ladders that lift them out of poverty?
It's a really good question. I would say, as we have seen with the downturn in the coal economy and the coal power plant and supply chain industry sectors across the region the communities have pivoted in developing training programs and projects that address that very question. And what we have done as an agency, and through, I believe, when Barack Obama first started back in 2015, he created the Power Initiative. So this is, he funneled money and resources to Appalachia for us to develop the program, to distribute the funding through a competitive process where communities are able to, on a local level, so on a place-based type of level, to look at what types of programs do we need to develop to transition workers into a different economy. And what we have found through that experience from those different implementation of the projects is that that's something really hard to do, right? If you have a sector or community or region that has historically been involved in one sector, and then you're trying to pivot and you're trying to develop a new sector, and at the same time you have a workforce who's looking for jobs, that's hard. And sometimes the strategy in economic development is, well, let's bring outside investment and outside companies within a region and bring a business in. And sometimes, as you probably all know, that doesn't work, right? We need a different kind of strategy to build up the resiliency of communities. So strategy is that communities are coming up with place-based type of economic strategies where they're engaging different types of sectors. So not only businesses, not only training providers, but nonprofits, community-based organizations, action agencies to help workers transition into a new sector. And I think that varies. When we say the word worker, that's a broad word because we have workers who might be close to retirement, but they have lost their job because of transitioning from a particular sector into a new one. So how do you engage someone who has worked in one sector into a new sector? And that really requires a community to come together and think about strategies to develop jobs, right? Jobs that are relatable to individuals who are might be looking for a different type of job and not just going from being a coal mine worker to the health industry. That's a drastic shift. So our lens has been giving the communities the funding for them to actually develop strategies for the development of programs that relate more to the worker at hand. So it could be looking at maybe more at the automotive industry as well. So that's an in-demand industry sector where there are jobs available, especially across Southern Appalachia. And looking at, and for example, in Alabama, looking at engaging in a very strategic way with workers who have been laid off and engaging them in a particular automotive industry sector or job. So that's one strategy that we have seen that has worked, but it does require thinking and strategic planning to develop a program that helps communities to think about more about the worker and how to engage the worker, and not necessarily, here's a job, there's an open job, apply for the job. It's harder nowadays to, I think, to just have a quick result with that type of thinking. It requires a little bit more thorough planning. So that's through Power, and also through another related program is also Arise as well, where we have currently developed, and as well with COVID, we have seen as across the nation, a downturn in certain sectors within regions. So you have people that might be laid off because they have worked in the retail industry, or they have worked in different types of industries that have been negatively impacted by COVID. And that type of program, Arise, is giving also an opportunity for communities to think about how they can work across states to develop large-scale projects to drive more on a larger scale their economies across borders.
Yep. And one of the things I love that I just want to highlight about both of your agencies and what I sort of gleaned from that conversation, it's rare to have federal investment that's not prescriptive, but both of you seem to really concentrate on scaling localized solutions. Mm-hmm. And that originating from community trust organizations. So that's what I think I really love about both of you. I know that we're leaning towards lunch, but before we move into Q&A, I just want both of you to be able to amplify your resources and where people might be able to access them as some of these grants are coming down from EDA and then maybe funneled through the economic development commissions. Yeah. So do you want to highlight?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way is to go to our website, which is dra.gov. On our website, you can sign up for alerts, and we share information about the region, any announcements or grant announcements we have. As I mentioned, this month of December, we have a notice of funding going out for our Delta Workforce Program. We're really excited about that. We're able to leverage bipartisan infrastructure law dollars with that programming. We are trying to continue to find ways to be more responsive to community with the strategic planning grants, because I agree, people need the runway to think more and don't always have that opportunity to do that. But you can find all our information about our agency and sign up for alerts on dra.gov.
And at ARC, you can reach us on our arc.gov or gov site. Once you log on the site, it would ask you to sign up for a newsletter, the In the Region newsletter. So via that newsletter, you can keep up to date with our competitive programs, anything, our success stories that we have across the region. Just to put a plug here while I'm here, the Arise RFP, I know we have some constituents here in the room, is out on our website. You can look at that RFP. We also have Inspire and Power coming out in 2023. And also the work initiative, not making any commitments on behalf of DOL, but that is probably coming out sometime.
I'll let you touch that.
In early 2020.
They're not anywhere. It's a safe space. All right, well, thank you both. How about we move to Q&A?
Thank you. Dwayne Yoder with Scarrett County Community Action in Maryland. Emily, I think it's directed at you because it's an ARC question. It's been our experience, at least historically, that ARC has not funded housing as an economic development strategy or job retention strategy. And so I guess my question is, in a region like our region, where housing, workforce housing now has been identified as the top priority in terms of job creation, job retention. Do you think ARC will be funding housing projects as an economic development strategy in the future?
It's a very good question. I think in the past, we have funded, and I'm going to look for my experts probably at ARC that work with housing projects. Housing projects that we fund, of course, there has to be some kind of economic development return on that investment. So looking at projects and designing them in collaboration with possibility with businesses. So if there's a need for example, job creation, and there's a need for housing in that particular area, and housing that will benefit a business, but also the worker there who is working for the business and residing in the community. If you want, I can definitely follow up with you and get your card and get one of my experts to talk to you more about your project.
They might need you to use the mic for the virtual attendees, Michael.
Seems like with a name like Michael Jackson, I wouldn't be intimidated by this.
Right.
But I was wondering about this exact same question, Dr. Wiggins, for DRA. I'm old enough that when the Lower Mississippi Delta Development Commission Act was passed, my boss co-sponsored it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was part of that consideration was housing. So can you answer the same question? And then secondly, might you be interested in a meeting with some of the nonprofit community development corporations in the Delta?
Yeah, so we don't do housing funding. It's not something that ended up in our mission and statute. But I'll say this, we completely understand the need for housing in our region. Any community that we've been able to visit, I've been able to talk to folks, any conversation around economic development, jobs, the biggest struggle that I've seen that some of our smaller communities are facing is we don't have housing stock. We don't have rooftops. What I will lift up is, I know Lee was in here earlier and was talking about the Rural Partners Network. What I will lift up, what we try to do is work with other federal partners to try to bring attention to those issues. You know, I saw you had listed sort of, I think, connector or convener. We operate in the same way where we try to be a connector and convener for the communities in our region that we work with to connect to other agencies and federal partners. So we don't do any direct funding about housing, but recognize the fact that is a real issue in a lot of communities we come across in and talk to. We are always, I talk about having feedback loops, we're always thinking about ways of how we can leverage our funding, because we do have some flexibility and we want to stay within the confines of what we can do. But we just hadn't figured out what our role could be in that space. But as talking to community development corporations, yes, this work that we do, and I believe in a model of, you know, how do you invest in communities and support them in being sustainable while not using the word sustainability as a hindrance from investing in them. Because sometimes we can look at projects and look at things we want to do and say, is it sustainable? And we were real quick and we're reviewing those projects sometimes and say, well, it's not sustainable. Yeah, but how we're defining sustainability. As you can see, I got a lot of thoughts around how we define things, because we can see how things can be defined to limit opportunity for marginalized communities. So definitions, the data, the lens in which we view it becomes very, very important. So I believe in local development. I believe in local organizations because I think those are institutions of power. I think Alan is here in the room. Mm-hmm. Alan is here in the room somewhere. Alan Branson from Hope Enterprise Corporation, place I used to work and enjoyed my time there. So I believe in local institutions. So we're willing to talk and meet our team, myself and folks, to talk about how we get towards solutions.
I'm going to close this out with the last question. We already know that rural places are philanthropically underserved. 20% of the population resides in our communities, but we only receive 7% of private grant making. Tribal only receives 0.2%. But when we look at the data released by the Federal Reserve, CDFIs tend to have a disproportionate impact in rural places, usually because they have capital and they have bandwidth to provide programming. How are you both partnering in harnessing the power of community development financial institutions within your work?
I mean, every opportunity that we get. Going back to the point of institutions, these CDFIs are community institutions. People know them, they work with them, they engage them. They may or may not know who DRA is, right? So it's not our job to be to get all of this light and all this shine. It's our job to do our job, which is leverage our dollars to have impact in the community. So we regularly work with CDFIs, regularly in conversations about how can we grow those relationships, and just really thinking about like braided funding models. Like, how do you take federal dollars? One of the things that people love about us is that our funding is stackable. It can be matched to other federal grants. Yeah, folks love when they hear that.
It doesn't necessarily always have that 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, and so people leverage us in that way. We're thinking about like, how do you leverage our dollars? How do you leverage private capital? How do you leverage philanthropic dollars? To me, that's when we're talking about sustainability, where a community can come get a project done and have sources and ways to think about sustainability.
Take us home.
Yeah, and at ARC, we do that through many different ways. So, but two ways that I want to highlight here, and I mentioned that previously, through our area development and also through our power initiative. I'm going to use those as examples. So we invest federal funding into revolving loans where entities come together with, I'm going to just use some of words here that some of my constituents might be familiar with, the Appalachian Funders Network. That is a network of philanthropic organizations that work together with CDFIs to invest dollars and to leverage dollars and leverage capital into investing into, for example, the question was brought up, housing, for example. So the project might be housing. So that's an indirect way where we provide capital and resources to an entity to work together with CDFIs to funnel funding for different types of projects, including housing and other types of projects as well.
All right, well, thank you both so much. Give them a round of applause if you would. And as we step away, Rural List Director Kate Kane's going to come to the stage and give you a brief update.
Thank you so much, Corey and Emila. This was a wonderful conversation. Certainly appreciated the dialogue in terms of really embedding equity into our DNA and also thinking through more strategic alignment around workforce development solutions and corresponding resources for us to be able to do so. So we are going to be taking a break. We're going to be coming back and reconvening in this room at 1 p.m. So really encouraging everybody to get up, stretch, maybe go upstairs, take some beautiful photos with the Christmas trees and for your holiday cards. Great opportunity to do that. Great opportunity to reconnect and do a little bit of networking. But I would be completely remiss if I did not encourage all of us to just kind of turn around to the back of the room and give a great shout out to the Rural List team. That infrastructure in the back of the room is the reason that we're here today. And I just want to thank them so much for all of their hard work. And I also want to thank the hotel crew for just doing yeoman's work and coming in here and doing a quick turnover so we can be back in this room at exactly 1 p.m. for our keynote luncheon. Thank you so much.
Everybody, we have a little bit of a clarification. We are feeding you, so you don't have to go get lunch. We just need you to move so we can move the room around to make you comfortable to eat.